Thank you all for joining us today at the very first webinar of the CWIS webinar series on the topic of toilet and containment upgrade. We have launched the CWIS webinar series as a way for the BMGF CWIS cohort partners to exchange ideas and talk about how they're going about trying to achieve the CWIS outcomes of equity, safety, and sustainability. And most importantly, to share and discuss their challenges and practical learnings in the process. So this series was actually originally intended to be held only for the CWIS cohort partners, but given the widespread interest in this topic, we have opened the webinar to a few special invitees from the World Bank, from the AFDB African Water Facility, the TA Hub from Senegal, as well as key stakeholder groups within Uganda and Zambia. So key stakeholders, for example, we have the Ministry of Water and Environment from Uganda, and also the National Water and Sewerage Corporation, and Water for People, who is a key implementation partner in Kampala. So today's webinar will be led by Ms. Odette Mushimpa, who is a water supply and sanitation specialist at the World Bank. We also have our very own Alan and Mwansa, who will be sharing about their own city's experiences and leading the discussions on their challenges and learnings. For those of you who are not familiar with them, Mwansa is a sanitation expert at the Lusaka Water Supply and Sanitation Company, the utility of Lusaka province in Zambia. Alan is a CWIS program manager at the Kampala Capital City Authority, the city government of Kampala, Uganda. You will be able to find out more about our moderator and panelists and their CWIS work on the Google Doc, which is linked in the chat box. We will also be using this Google Doc for Q&A throughout the webinar, and we encourage you to use this space to post your questions during the Q&A. So I'm also going to quickly show the Google Doc so that everybody is familiar with it. So this is I hope everybody can see my screen. Yeah. So this is a Google Doc that we have posted in our chat box. And this is what we will be using for the Q&A after the presentations. So other than some general housekeeping, we also have the agenda for today. So this is a 90-minute webinar, and it will be moderated by Odette. So it will be followed by presentations from our city teams, and then followed by Q&A and also the closing comments. So this is a space where all of you are welcome to post your questions during the webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Odette, who will be moderating and starting the topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kun. And thank you so much, all of you, for joining us this afternoon on my side, morning for some of you, and welcome to this webinar. Most of you know that on-site sanitation remains one of the basic services with least investment, despite being one of the most used solutions, particularly in developing countries. And limited investments is partly driven by the fact that there are very few experiences at scale and limited knowledge on how best to plan, to support cities, then moving forward with the agenda. Therefore, learning from those experiences from the ground is very helpful in promoting investments on on-site sanitation, and particularly on containment facilities. One thing to mention is the fact that with the SDGs and the Citywide Inclusive Sanitation initiative, we've actually moved our discussion from just the containment facilities into, a more sort of integrated approach, because that discussion has actually exposed the magnitude of the problem and have been sort of incentivizing governments and partners to think about the service chain. And here, just wanted to mention the fact that Kampala and Lusaka are two cities where service providers have actually taken a bold decision to go beyond the conventional approach and explore models for citywide inclusive service delivery. There are, of course, other cities that are sort of taking the same approach. Just to mention a few where I've had actually the opportunity to work with, Maputo is doing the same in Mozambique, Lilongwe in Malawi, where I actually live. The city council is also exploring that same initiative with support from the World Bank. The bank has specifically been sort of supporting, I mean, the World Bank, of course, other institutions as well, have been specifically supporting investments towards citywide inclusive sanitation. And here I also wanted to acknowledge the fact that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have been really leading this agenda across the globe and supporting different institutions as a leading partner for promoting citywide inclusive sanitation. I'll give them the opportunity for Mwanza and Alan to share some of the experiences they have from the ground. Of course, we'll have time to discuss. And during that discussion, some of you are attending and have some other experiences that can contribute to this discussion. Please feel free to come in, and you're welcome to share with us some of these experiences. Mwanza, over to you.
Thank you very much, Odette. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking time to join us. I will share a presentation on upgrading containment facilities, which is a case of Lusaka Water and what the city has been up to. Lusaka Water and Sanitation Company is undertaking what we're calling a Lusaka Sanitation Program, which is funded by the World Bank, the African Development Bank, European Investment Bank, FW, and the Bill and Melinda Gates. And so just a brief background for some of the participants that are not really familiar with Lusaka. As of 2018, the population of Lusaka is about 2.69 million, of which 70% of this population live in what we call the peri-urban areas, or what I think most of us refer to as low-income areas. So these areas are mostly characterized by most informal and unserviced services that are experienced. And with regards to the sewer network, we have about, the city is about 40 to 15% of the city is sewered. Based on the sheet flow diagram that we developed in 2018, we are sitting about 83% of fecal sludge and wastewater that is untreated. So the map that we've put up here just really shows the areas that we have versus the sanitation facilities that we have in relation to the groundwater vulnerability. And then if we look at the graph that we have right above here, it just shows the type of sanitation facility that people have, which relates to also the water sources. And we have gone further also to look at the various quantiles of people with regards to what sanitation option that they have and what work quantile they fall in. And as you can notice, we have, I think, open defecation sitting at the very bottom, which I think is expected in any case. So this map really talks about the groundwater vulnerability of area of Lusaka. If we see the orange brownish looking color, it actually shows how vulnerable the underground water is. I should mention that for low-income areas, about 60% of the water that is provided to this household is actually sourced from boreholes within these areas, and that's why we have this. We had this agenda to ensure that we look at the containment facility, because most of the waterborne diseases and outbreaks that we had a relationship with groundwater, fecal oral contamination. And so this is the reason why Lusaka Water as a utility took up this initiative to actually carry out activities on containment. So just really to talk about the paradigm shift, I will not really go so much more on this, but just the fact that if you see just the time it's taken to about 2018 when we had the first the sanitation master plan developed, and also financing from the Millennium Challenge Corporation, where we developed the sanitation master plan, to moving to having the Vision 2030, which is an alignment to the SDGs, because Zambia as a country also subscribed to the SDGs, and up to where we are right now. We had investments starting in 2015, like I mentioned, from the World Bank, the FTB, KFW, and EIB, and the Bill and Melinda Gates that started to support the Lusaka Sanitation Program in 2018. But really where the focus was, I would say that for Lusaka especially, from this period, we had seen that there was really intention about providing services to the low-income areas. But what really we did not have is really the regulation to support it, and also the policy to support the activities that were being undertaken with regards to provision of underground on-site sanitation services. So then how really does the Lusaka Water, how have they convinced the communities to actually upgrade, and I put in brackets, to pay for their sanitation facility? Because I think most of the challenge that we have, and especially in the region in Africa, is the fact that the low-income communities are also characterized with they do not have, really sanitation is not a priority because they've got competing needs. And so sanitation is always looked at as the least need for them to invest in. So this basically means in my local language that we do not have money. So what did Lusaka Water take up? So we had to take, what we realized is, based on the lessons we learned, Lusaka Water carried out a number of various projects with regards to containment. But what we did once we had the Lusaka sanitation program set up was the fact that we thought we needed to carry out and understand more what is really the challenge. How come we construct facilities and then we expect them people to upscale, but that never really gets to materialize? So we had to understand what was really the problem. So we had various feedback that we received from the money. And I think one of the most interesting thing was the fact that you're a donor-funded project. So you're supposed to help us, which is really the notion, because when there's a project, and especially when it's containment, we expect to help people and we do not expect them to pay for the services and the products that we are offering. So then also one key thing that we had to understand in the areas that we are working in, especially that is 70% of the population of Lusaka, who are the key decision makers. Because once we understood that, it was easier for us to know who we should really target with regards to them paying for the product that we are offering, and in this case, the containment. So in the case of Lusaka, which I think also applies to a lot of other areas, even around the globe when it comes to low-income areas, the fact that we have what we call the homeowners, we have the resident landlords who have various needs, and also the absentee landlords. What was interesting was the fact that we had to understand what really is their need. So if we're a resident landlord, what is key is he has his family at the same property, who are his first priority. And so when it comes to providing sanitation, facility or good sanitation, his family is the first priority compared to the tenants that they have. So after we had realized the challenges and also identified our audiences, we had to carry out a survey for about 10,000 households in the areas that we are working in. The first step that we undertook was we needed to understand that what can we do to actually push beyond the first barrier, of which is pricing and affordability. And it was very interesting from the responses that we got, apart from the fact that people do not have money. The others that said they have other expenses that are more pressing than buying a sanitation facility, so paying for a service, and then others that said I do not have all that money right now. And so this kind of information, coupled with a willingness to pay studies, helped us structure our service, our delivery models, so that we can actually achieve our goal of having households to contribute to construction of facilities, with bearing in the mind that the fact that these are low-income communities and we do not expect them to actually have the financial muscle to pay for the full cost of these facilities. So with this challenge, we realized that we had to dig deeper, because we always understood, I think we from the team that we had of specialized social marketing specialists, there has to be a yes after this challenge. And so what we realized that from the study, we realized that 60% of the people actually said they would actually pay for a facility if there was a discount. And then 91% said that if the message was framed around their legal obligation. In the case of Lusaka, we have the Public Health Act, which actually prompts households to have construct their sanitation facility. And then with regards to just value addition for the landlords, about 23% of them realize that once they actually have a good sanitation facility, it increases their financial muscle and also the rental that they can offer to their tenants. And then the second step that we had to undertake was to design products and services that people really want, which I think also speaks to what the CWIS framework is really all about. We had to, the products and services that we have are human-centered. We had to understand from what people really want and not really what we want as technocrats, because I think that has been the challenge. we come up with technologies that we take to the community without the community really accepting. And so for the case of Lusaka, what came out was the fact that people wanted a quality toilet that should last a long time. The norm had always been households having getting a local mason in the area to construct a facility that might only last as long as the rainy season. And so I think households were getting frustrated with the fact that they had to continuously invest in a sanitation facility. This was quite essential for us and quite important information for us to move to the next stage. So the third step that we also undertook was we had to tap into emotional motivators. This was very interesting, especially at the time we were carrying out this research, because Lusaka just suffered a cholera outbreak in 2017, where we lost about 150 lives. And so what was interesting was to find that certain households actually didn't understand that a bad sanitation facility actually can contribute to causing cholera. They understood they had to wash their vegetables, they understood they had to wash their fruits, they understood they had to wash their hands, but really the linkage about a bad sanitation facility, especially that their water sources from the boreholes didn't really occur to a lot of them until we had this discussion. And so based on the feedback that we got, we had to rely on that for us to design our service delivery model. Also, word of mouth, quite key. As much as we can put up adverts, we can go to radios, we can go to TV. I think there's in the low-income communities, which I think is a characteristic that's characterized most of the low-income areas, was the fact that word of mouth, the trust that people develop for each other, the existing networks around the faith-based organization, the water kiosks where they have a tap attendant that actually draws, where they draw water from, they develop that trust. And so in trying to come up with the ways we should deliver this message and also sell our products and services, we had to rely on this word of mouth and also the community that existed in the communities where we are intervening in. And then also the last step that we took was we had to learn that we need to learn as we go. I think Odette mentioned that most cities are now moving, and I think there hasn't been, unlike the SUAs, we have seen that there's a lot of learning, and I think most of the cities are learning about non-SWAT sanitation, and it's very important as local authorities as well as water utility companies to learn as we go. It's always good to actually be very flexible around the flexibility of some of the deliveries that you put up. If they do not respond, you quickly pivot. And it was very important for us not to guess. Like I mentioned, we didn't want to guess because we know the type of technologies that we have. We know the type of containment we can design for various households. But it was important for us to actually get it from the households and then test it, because we did not want to guess, then proceed to move on. And then, so in terms of what I've spoken about, how really did we apply the CWIS principles? So briefly, if you see the way the urban sanitation markets are actually structured in Lusaka, you'll see that before really, we had, in terms of accountability and authority, the focus was more on storage. And recently, in the past 4 years, we have had such a good enabling environment and also changing across each and every stakeholder that is involved in provision of sanitation and across the entire sanitation chain. Currently, if you can see, we have seen, if you see in regards to the service model, the utility was not fully involved. We had projects, but then the mandate of the utility didn't really compel us to provide non-SWAT sanitation services. But that has changed since after the regulator has actually changed the name of the utility from water and storage to water and sanitation. And this has actually happened across the entire sanitation chain, coupled with upgrading of the regulatory framework that we have, as well as putting up a ministry that is dedicated to look at water and sanitation services in the city or in the country. And this has also actually helped, and this is something that is quite essential to deliver on-site sanitation. Odette alluded to the fact that there are many key players that actually have to come into this. We have about 70% and mostly majority about 50 or 60% of people living in low-income areas. And this is not an activity or a mandate that one institution like a water utility company or a local authority can actually push. We require support from all key stakeholders to push the mandates and to ensure that policies and strategies that are put up support the implementation and the delivery of these products and services. So then, I want to put up how did we really apply the CWIS framework? Just in brief, I want to talk about, when we talk about equity, self, and sustainability, I mentioned the fact that we have human-centered designs that we've constructed for on-site sanitation facilities. One key thing that we relate and why I had to show the groundwater vulnerability at the start of this project was the fact that the minimum standard that we put up for the design that we developed was the fact that, first of all, they had to be emptyable. But then secondly, we ensure that the substructure protects the groundwater. What we found out from the research was the fact that households really just care about what they see, which is a superstructure. But then for a utility that is actually has a mandate to provide services along the sanitation chain, which was very key for us to have toilets that are emptyable, but also secondly protects the underground water, because we have the mandate to provide clean water as well as sanitation services. So we constructing 5,500 toilets as for households. We are also constructed about 100 public sanitation facilities, which are disaggregated by sex and disability. And then also in terms of a delivery model, we had to look at two ways. We had to use community-based medicines as well as performance-based contracts with the local contractors. This is, we also focused on the fact or the aspects of gender mainstreaming and empowering the community. That's also kind of links to SDG 3 and SDG 11, apart from us just looking at SDG number 6. This has helped us to learn and draw lessons on how then we should continue to move on and implement. And then in terms of the creative tools that we have, I mentioned the fact that we had to come up with smart messaging, where we have about where we advertise the full cost and then provide a subsidy, and then also talk about the health of households buying a toilet that protects their households. So in terms of just a brief status that we have, in the case of the 3,500 toilets we have, right now we've constructed about 2,749. And then this is the map, just shows the areas we have constructed. And then in terms of the other area in George, we've also constructed about 1,654 against the target of 2,500. This picture just really shows the upgrades that we've made for certain households, and then also just the work that we've undertaken. So we'll have further discussion, but really if you want to learn more about the works that we are doing, please, you can feel free to get online and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Mwanza, for this great presentation. Perhaps while Alan puts up his presentation, I just want to encourage participants to use the Google Docs for your questions. You can also post it here directly in the chat if you feel more comfortable doing that. But please bring in your questions that I'm sure Mwanza and Alan will be very happy to respond to. Also feel free to share some of your own experiences that would be useful for the other participants here. So Alan, I see you're ready. So please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Odette. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here and to interact with you all. I'm going to share our experiences from Kampala on the program to increase access to improved sanitation in low-income communities of Kampala using a toilet upgrade program. And I'm happy to be doing this on behalf of a very big team, part of which is listening in. So please, team, when the opportunity comes, please chip in. And in terms of the presentation, I'll briefly talk about the containment status in the city and how we went about to structure the toilet improvement program in Kampala. So for those who may not know where Kampala is, it is the capital city of Uganda, and it's by the lake shore, on the shores of Lake Victoria, which is one of the largest freshwater lakes in the world. And so, as you can imagine, many of the sanitation programs are really trying to protect the water quality of the lake, in addition to the public health and environmental health of the city. it has a population of roughly 1.5 to 2 million during the night, so those who sleep within the city, and during the day that doubles to 3 to 4 million. But 60% of those that reside in the city really live in the informal settlements. And so, as you can imagine, the rapid urbanization that is taking place, this is not very unique to Kampala, but it is a problem nonetheless for many city authorities. When it comes to the value chain, access to toilets is actually not too bad. It's 99% of visitors and residents have access to some form of sanitation. And as you can imagine, the devil is in the details, where we can see that roughly nearly 50% or half of that population accesses what we refer to as unimproved sanitation. And I'll be sharing on that in a short bit. And in terms of the mandates within the city, we have our national utility, the National Water and Sewerage Corporation, that handles the sewerage and also the treatment facilities within the city. The city authority, that is Kampala Capital City Authority, that handles the non-sewered sanitation. And also we have the regulators, who include the Ministry of Water, as well as the National Environment Management Authority. When it comes to the containment status, again, not unique to Kampala, pit latrines are the predominant form of sanitation in the city. And these are of varying quality. Actually, the majority, as you saw in the previous slide, are referred to as unimproved, meaning that they are likely to pollute the environment in one form or the other. And this situation becomes even more dire when we get to the low-income communities, where only 11% of the communities in these settlements accesses unimproved household facility. When these toilets fill up, nearly half of them are abandoned for lack of any other choice. And we also see toilets being emptied into the environment. But before I leave this slide, just wanted to mention also that the responsibility for household containment is mainly one for the households. And so with this context, really, there was a need for a household improvement program. And to start off with, it was the city authorities and stakeholders wanted to understand what the barriers were to improve sanitation in these low-income communities. And then a number, as you can see, some obviously not surprising in terms of the ability and willingness to pay. Like Mwasa and Lusaka mentioned, the residents in these communities are really those on the lowest quintile in terms of wealth. And so sanitation services in most cases are not affordable. But that, coupled with also the availability of these services or products, was a barrier, as well as having a distribution system that really wasn't making it convenient for households to upgrade their facilities. Of course, not forgetting that many of these low-income communities or settlements are in areas that are usually characterized by high water table, flooding risks, and also congested, as you can see in that picture. So the city authorities with stakeholders then got together to try and address this issue of how to increase the access to improved sanitation in the city. And they didn't have to start from scratch because there's a sewerage and FSM ordinance in place that clearly outlines the roles of all the stakeholders within the value chain. And what this ordinance also does is introduce minimum standard for on-site technology. And as that table below shows, the minimum standard is a lined facility. And so this is really a more strict definition as compared to the JMP, where we only talk of a pit latrine without a slab. So the standards in Kampala are more strict in terms of the sanitation technologies that are permitted within the city. But also, there has been an FSM program that was supported by a number of stakeholders, including Gates, GIZ, WaterAid, and Water for People and others, that has helped to organize a lot of the collection and the transportation service segment of the value chain. And so it made sense that focus is now put on the household containment such that the whole value chain is integrated. And so in structuring the household toilet improvement program, the first thing that city authorities did was to partner with an NGO, Water for People, who had the experience in dealing with these low-income communities and in programs such as this. And this is really very useful because it reduces the learning curve in terms of implementation. The next stage was to structure the market. And so here we undertook a technology and market segmentation assessment of the value chain in these low-income communities. And so the idea here was to identify what are the available sanitation services and products within the low-income communities, and possibly where are the barriers and what would be the preferred technology options in these low-income communities. And lastly, what would, if there are any, what would those market segments be? So this study identified 3 market segments that we conveniently termed or categorized as high income, medium to low income, and the vulnerable urban poor. So having done that assessment, the next task was to develop a catalog of sanitation technology options that would be applicable in these low-income communities. And this was done based on a human-centered design approach, just like Lusaka, looking at what would these products be, what would the cost be, and what would the willingness be for these services. Just to mention that the most preferred toilet in these low-income communities is a 2-stance lined facility with a bathroom, as that illustration shows. Next was to then look at the distribution of these services and products within these low-income communities. And the idea here was to follow a market-based sanitation approach where we have an aggregator or a coordinator who would really be that central person to aggregate the various suppliers, the various products and services that a typical household encounters. So if I take a step back, what is the market segmentation assessment study discovered was that on average, a household dealt with 5 different suppliers or skilled personnel when they were constructing a toilet. And this really was also identified as one of the barriers. So the idea of this aggregator is to try and really provide a one-stop shop where all these services can be coordinated and all the household sees is a finished product. This aggregator would also be responsible for the contractors and masons that would be delivering on these products. And in this case, a series of trainings has been conducted to bring the masons and the contractors up to speed with regards to the standards, with regards to the preferred products in these low-income communities. And lastly, what I can say is that right now, this role is still being performed by the NGO Water for People, but there is a transition phase to look for to get a social enterprise that can carry on this role going forward. Oh, my technology seems to be failing me in terms of the next, moving the next slide. Yes. So the other barrier that was identified with in the assessment study was financing. And so one of the interventions in this toilet improvement program is to test some financing options. And these were really matched to the to the 3 market segments that were identified. So for the high income market segment, the idea there was to link them to finance institutions that would avail favorable bank loans. These bank loans are guaranteed by this program. And then the medium and the low income segment would still have access to favorable bank loans, again, backed by a guarantee. But in addition to that, there was a second, if you like, a lease to own or repayment in installments option, where they express a commitment of 20% of the facility, and then this program would build the facility, and then the households then repays over a time period. But we also threw in an offer of a subsidy of 140 USD for the first 500 of these customers to come and express interest to that. And then lastly was the vulnerable poor, who really were not able to finance anything, and those were given 100% subsidy. Last activity there is the marketing and the promotions. And what I'll mention there is that we're using both the Masons and a community team to really market the program. So in terms of the results to date, this scheme is only about 8 months old. It was launched last November, but so far we have over 200 household applications, and that's the background, the breakdown there, showing those that are under the repayment scheme, those that the Masons have dealt with, the bank, and the like. And then on this slide, I just wanted to show that the payments are coming in. It's still early days, but at least they are coming in. And secondly, on that middle table, to show how that incentive or the subsidy of roughly 3,000 USD has been triggered or leveraged more than 10 times so far, to a total value of 31,500 USD. In terms of the challenges and the lessons learned, the challenges for starters around the accessing the loans with the banks. So this has been a bit slow for a number of reasons, the collateral requirements of the bank, but also the banks are being slow to realize that there can be money made in sanitation. The others, as I outlined there, but I also mentioned that the Masons and the companies also find sanitation work unprofitable, and so a lot of incentivization also needs to be done on the supply side. In terms of the lessons learned so far, households are wary of borrowing from banks, especially for sanitation upgrades. So providing the required collateral for sanitation facility is not an attractive proposition at the minute. And so we are looking at alternative financial institutions such as village saving and credit cooperatives to try and bridge that gap. And maybe the other silent feature there is that the guarantee funds, I think, will really kick in once this market is mature. The installment scheme or the lease to own scheme has been very popular, but as I said, it's still early days, and so we need to think of a repayment or enforcement mechanism. And if there are any experiences from other cities, this will be very much welcomed. In terms of the demand creation, that has been really done best by the teams on the ground. And last but not least, I'll finish off by saying what we're seeing so far is that there's still a need for a form of subsidy, a form of financing coming in to structure the market, and so doing enabling households to get onto the sanitation ladder, but also clear the inefficiencies within the market. I believe that is me done. I'll be happy to take questions, but recognize Water for People, our partner with whom we're delivering this, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thank you very much, Odette.
Thanks a lot, Alan. This was a very comprehensive presentation, and we see questions already coming in the chat box. But before I go to those questions, I mean, it's one of the challenges we have in the sector is really bringing together key stakeholders in order to start a movement towards investing on containment facilities. Alan, you actually highlighted the fact that toilets are the responsibility of the household. Mwanza, in your presentation, you tried to sort of structure a kind of responsibility sharing between households and the service provider, with the household sort of being responsible for the superstructure, and then you as a utility dealing with what you think would impact your ability to provide services. So my question to you both is, what does it take to actually start this conversation around investing on household sanitation facilities, which for some is considered to be a private good, although it has implications on the public sort of aspects of service delivery? Perhaps Mwanza, you can start, and then Alan, you can come in. Thank you. You on mute?
Oh, sorry about that. I said thank you. I think that is something, like I mentioned, really requires a lot of collaboration among stakeholders. You mentioned the aspect, I think, which is very interesting, and that is something that the city of Lusaka has been riding on, the public good aspects. Our Public Health Act actually also provides for households. The construction of a household facility is really a household responsibility. But then I also mentioned the fact that in Lusaka, it's only in the past 2 years actually, where we've not had a cholera outbreak. And so every rainy season, the cholera outbreaks became like a traditional ceremony every year. And when we sit as stakeholders around the table, one thing that was coming out forth is the fact that we would not rule out the fecal-oral contamination resulting from the not properly constructed households, pit latrines in the low-income areas. And so in the case of Lusaka Water, like I mentioned, when we received financing, I think one thing that was clear to us was the fact that we also needed to look at the sustainability aspects of it. And so working with Lusaka City Council, who have the mandate for the public building and also the Public Health Act, we had to come up with the way we structured it, because for the city of Lusaka, as well as for Lusaka Water and Storage, what was key was the fact that as we change our mandate, we needed to have facilities that we should empty. For the local authority, as well as the Ministry of Health, was the fact that we need to start working towards reducing the waterborne diseases that we're experiencing each and every year. And so that conversation, despite it being an obligation of the household, helped us to move this agenda. And I think what is interesting was the fact that when we structured our subsidy, or we actually don't call it a subsidy, we call it a discount, because we understand, we don't want households to think that the utility might continue to provide. But then also not outrooting the fact that there are people who are truly vulnerable in these areas and they require support. So no matter the enforcement acts that you can have or activities, they'll require the support of the utility or well-wishers to actually support them to have a better sanitation facility. And so for the case of Lusaka, I think that is a conversation, how we structured the conversation to get to where we are right now. I mentioned the fact that we are calling it a discount because we expect to gradually start to increase. Right now, households are paying equivalents of about $15 US for the superstructure. The project comes to an end next year, and something that we have to do is revise that subsidy. But one interesting aspect that has come up with a lot of the discussions that we've had was the fact that through our regulator, NWASCO, we realized as a utility that after the project, we should not stop to give the subsidy. So we have gotten a go-ahead to actually start to ring-fence a sanitation surcharge that helps us then continue to construct these facilities and more like to develop seed money that can construct various facilities for this household. So I think in short, it's really the aspect of looking at providing a sanitation service as a public good aspect rather than really not focusing on who's really supposed to construct it, because we've got people in the low income areas, these are unplanned areas, and we have to provide a service because that's our role as a service provider.
Thank you so much, Mwanza. You actually went ahead of me on my question on sustainability. But Alan, tell us, how did you start this conversation in Kampala? What did it take to convince stakeholders to come to the table? And perhaps as you talk about it, if you could also outline roles and responsibilities in terms of the different stakeholders, at least the key stakeholders, because Mr. Cliverson from Lilongwe was actually, he was asking Lusaka, but I think it applies also to Kampala. I mean, what was the role of the city authorities in that process? Because in both cases, you do have city authorities. You are representing a city authority, Alan. Mwanza is representing a utility, but you also have a utility in the case of Kampala. If you could speak to that, sort of in trying to respond to that question from Mr. Nyando, it would be good, Alan. Thanks.
Thank you, Odette. So for the case of Kampala, this conversation has been ongoing for quite a while. If I also put it in the national context, the fact that sanitation often gets the lower end of the financing envelope when it comes to water and sanitation programming, I think this is a conversation that has been going on for a while, and the idea of how to best improve or do things differently is something that this program of ours was really trying to hint at. But what I would say is that for Kampala, I think I'll trace this back to a very strong team at the city authority that decided to provide leadership for not only sanitation, but also the other services in the city. And that this strong leadership quality, if you like, or ability, managed to attract and coalesce a lot of stakeholders to the table where they could sit down and say, okay, what could we do for the city? And what is great about that whole scenario is that the city authority was then able to project its vision of what it wished to see the city look like. I think right now we are working towards the SDG 2030 agenda. So that really gives a very good finishing point to which all stakeholders can then try and connect and fit in. The next step was really to try and then work on incremental basis, but incremental basis. So as I mentioned in my presentation, we had an FSM program for the last, say, 5 years that really was trying to look at the collection and transportation. Before that, there was a program that was looking at how best the city can invest in sanitation intervention, looking at schools and public spaces. We have the utility national water that developed master plans to extend the sewer line, but to also improve the treatment facilities. So all of this really provided a very good backdrop for the city and stakeholders in Kampala to start saying, well, we've dealt with, or we've tried to touch the downstream end of the chain. How is our upstream? So we have the treatment plants, but where is the sludge coming from? We have the private sector organized to collect this waste, but where are they getting it from? So I think it was a natural progression for us to start focusing on the household level. And when we did, the issue of financing was really one of the biggest issues that came to the fore. And so you see in Kampala trying out a number of options in terms of how to make the sanitation products and services affordable. So looking at the toilet design, how can we make it, how can we lower the cost of our toilet facility so that more people can join in? How can we target a subsidy to really the vulnerable poor that can really need to do it, and for those that are able, then linking them with banks. So these are all options that are being reviewed now with to continue the discussion, and hopefully very soon we'll really have a very clear, if you like, approach to how this household sanitation can be dealt with. But back to the question to also mention in terms of the stakeholders. So we have a number of stakeholders, but the key ones are really the Ministry of Water and Environment here in Uganda, that is responsible for policy, but also regulation at that national level. We've got the National Environment Management Authority that then looks out for environmental regulation. We've got the utility, National Water and Sewerage Corporation, that provides the sewerage services, the water services, and for fecal sludge management, the treatment services as well. And then the city authority coming in to try and regulate the value chain from where the sludge or the fecal sludge is being collected. So it's really coming in for the FSM side of the business to regulate how it is collected, where it's collected from, and where it is delivered. Then lastly, we work with NGOs, community-based organizations who are really entrenched in those communities and do a great deal of work in mobilizing them to really tap into initiatives such as this. Thank you, Odette.
Thanks a lot, Alan. You know, one question that keeps coming, and you somehow alluded to it, has to do with the financing. I mean, one of the participants has actually asked, how did you manage to bring on board financing institutions? And in the case of Lusaka, beyond the subsidy, are there other financing mechanisms to support households, let's say, to identify resources for the balance? Alan, since you are on my screen, maybe you can start as to how did you manage to actually bring on board financing institutions to support you? And then once you can talk about the other mechanisms available for financing in the case of Lusaka.
Thank you, Odette. As I mentioned in the presentation, that the issue of financing is a big one. And one of the options was to link with the finance institutions. And so that conversation starts initially by doing a very quick mapping of financial institutions that have products that are close to wash, because then those are really the easier ones to start off having a conversation with. And then you extend that conversation to finance institutions that deal with your target market segment. So those that deal with the low-income communities, and the like. So as we speak, we've got two big banks that have wash products and that are part of this program. And these banks we provided a small guarantee so that they'll be able to extend these wash loans to the interested households. And what I'll add is that what we found interesting during the discussions was the need to actually have dedicated bank staff that are really looking at wash. So often, given the choice between a loan portfolio, say of property, of houses and wash products, all the officers will tend to go for the property side. So that was one thing that really came up quite early on, that there was a need for dedicated officers, which means that we had to put in place a small incentivization scheme for them so that they can be able to promote and sell these loans in the communities. And as I mentioned, this is then linked by, in this case, the Water for People with the community teams who do the ground marketing, and as well as the masons and the contractors there. What we've noticed though is that, as we mentioned, that the uptake has been a bit slow, and this is because of the requirements of a typical bank. And so right now the discussion is to try and explore how we could work with village saving credit facilities or smaller microfinance institutions to provide these loans. And this is a conversation that is ongoing at the minute. So it is something that we'll be able to share perhaps in the next forum. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alan. Mwansa, you want to come in?
Yes, please. So I think apart from, I think your question was apart from the subsidy, what are we what are the financing mechanisms are we looking at? So what we initially, when we set out, I think our expectation was we will let households really pay for the facility. And then what we also did was a flexibility, the duration in which household could pay. So we allowed them to pay over a duration of 6 months. But what has been interesting as we been on this project was the fact that we actually partnered with WaterAid, who worked through people's process for poverty and housing. So they introduced the first sanitation loans that we're calling them. So they would actually approach households, and households would get more like a loan to pay for the subsidy that they were required to pay. And to date, what we have seen is actually we've seen two small microfinancing institutions that have also come in. This is something that we really didn't even anticipate as we are planning on the project, but I think we have seen the interest, and that's one area we want to explore around the gap and the appetite of especially the small microfinancing institutions that have come up to support the households. And see how then best we can expand on that and on this market so that we actually have various products and services. Right now, like I said, we have two, but I think the coming in of many others then also reduces the interest rates that are paid by the households. Currently, the interest rates are quite minimal, I think, and then what they have done, so to differentiate from what Lusaka Water is doing, is the fact that we expect households to pay within a duration of 6 months, but these microfinancing institutions have actually allowed the households to pay over a period of about 8 months. And that has also increased and contributed to the demand that has been created in the project areas that we are in, and also just generally around the city for better sanitation services, facilities, yes.
Thanks a lot, Mwansa. One interesting question that has just popped up from Najib has to do with the role of the private sector. I think I mean, both of you in your presentation somehow mentioned it, but you didn't necessarily highlight them as a key sort of stakeholder. And his question is around their contribution in creating demand and promoting standards, and what kind of incentives you can actually put into the market to sustain the market structure where you do have an active participation of the private sector. So if both of you could speak to that, that would be very helpful. Thanks.
Okay, I think I think that's something like you rightly put it, we didn't really want to dwell on. So I mentioned the fact that we've got two contracting models that we have been trying to work on. And I think what has been interesting and something that I think we've appreciated is the fact that we have very good lessons that we've obtained from both service models. I mentioned the community-based CBE model that we are using to construct the facilities, as well as the performance-based contracts. On the community-based model, what we when we moved into start the project, we had actually interest from the private sector who were already selling different types of technologies of toilets. So mostly they were prefab toilets. What we tried to do was to incorporate them. So when we created what we are calling our showrooms, like our centers where people could see various facilities, we actually provided that option for prefabricated toilets as well. So we constructed our toilets, and then we also allowed the private sector to put up the toilets so that households could then have an option of what facility that we took. One interesting finding that came out from here was the fact that for the case of Lusaka, and maybe this could be in other areas, really a lot of people were not open to having prefabricated toilets. And so we had to change the way we involve the private sector in our business. We picked, I think we still have about 2 of them that we started with that are also constructing the toilets. So the way we have done it in the project was the fact that we allowed them to create their demand and signed a memorandum of understanding between the project as well as the private sector. And then we allow them to construct based on the models that people are willing to actually work with. One interesting thing that we have in terms of incentivizing is really the fact that we actually pay them for the cost. So they buy the material, they construct, and they do the demand creation. In terms of incentivizing, really, in Lusaka, where we have done a lot of work on that, is something that I think on the FSM business, which really is not like the call of discussion, but what we have seen is the fact that we are open to the private sector and their involvement, and then also the contribution that they have done, especially in Lusaka. We have seen our thought really of why we've kept them on the project is the fact that it's accessibility to households and also the familiarity of them being in the area and households knowing that they can rely on them to construct these facilities going forward. Yeah, I think that's in terms of containment, that is the role that Lusaka Water has actually taken with the private sector. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Mwansa. Alan, do you want to contribute to this and perhaps more on how to sustain this market structure with private sector being actively sort of involved into promoting and constructing containment facilities?
Thank you, Odette. I think just to add to what Mwansa has just described in Lusaka, for the case of Kampala, one thing that we have seen is that there is a very vibrant private sector that is already providing a range of services and a range of products to really the wide range of consumers that is available. So you want the Rolls Royce, you get it. You want the really cheap option, you can get it. So there's a really a very big team of private sector entrepreneurs that are providing this role. What the issue has been one of quality. So just to ensure that it's a consistently good quality that is of service or the product that is being provided. And the other has been one of pricing. So just make sure that consumers are not outpriced of some of these services and products. And so what this program is doing in Kampala is one, training these masons and the private sector. So not only the masons, but really the value chain. Just to ensure that that quality aspect is maintained in the services and products that they're providing. And then the exercise to try and identify toilets that are preferred within these low-income communities has been another opportunity to try and really set some pricing guidelines to the construction of these facilities. As you may have seen in one of my slides, this is sometimes very hard to set a particular price for because of some of the ground conditions that are found in these places. So you find that the price of a facility will vary depending on the location where it's going to be put. But we roughly now have a range of pricing that can help inform, can help households make decisions on the kind of sanitation services they need. And really the role of the city authorities in this case is to try and establish this enabling environment where they can thrive. So the ordinance being one such piece of instrument, which really clearly states what, first of all, introduces them as key actors within the value chain, but also spells out what they can do. So really recognizing the role that the private sector can play. And then the other is to do with now mobilizing the communities, so doing a lot of the promotions in the communities for the services, doing enforcement so as to drive business as well to the private sector, and maybe trying to also, like Lusaka's case, set up some contracting, if you like, mechanisms. So establishing territorial areas where some of these entrepreneurs can enjoy some business, increased demand in terms of the businesses. So I think by doing this, really, we'll be able to sustain the private sector contribution to the value chain. And maybe as I conclude, just to highlight that in this case, the subsidies, which we also call discounts in Kampala, are really coming in to try and catalyze, try and really trigger this kind of activity between households and the private sector in the low-income communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. While you're still there, one of the participants asked about who pays for the subsidy. Now, I understand in both cases, the projects are paying for the subsidy. And in the case of Lusaka, they do have a plan post-project, which is the sanitation surcharge on the water bill, which has been approved by the regulator. It was there before, actually. In the case of Lusaka, there is that culture of paying for the surcharge already. What about Kampala? What's your plan? Once the project closes, are you also closing this facility? How do you plan to sustain it?
Thanks once again for that good question. So when it comes to the subsidies, as you mentioned that we are promoting them or selling them as discounts rather than subsidies. So the idea being that they're only there for a limited time and for a specific number of people. And at the back end, the role is really to promote that link between the market, the sanitation market, and the households that need to access that sanitation market. So we think that by the end of that discount period, that linkage will have been created, and that all the city will need to do is to continue to foster that enabling environment for the private sector to be able to respond to the increased demand from the households. Unfortunately, in Kampala, we don't have a sanitation levy, so we are not there yet. But demonstrating or using programs like this to demonstrate how sanitation can be improved in communities, and the need for that occasional one-off injection of funding is a step in the right direction to show that actually if we had a ring-fenced form of financing for sanitation, we'll be able to even achieve much more. Thank you very much.
You're right, Alan. I think just the ability to demonstrate starts that conversation and triggers market changes. Now, one thing that I noticed, but I've also seen that some of the participants have noticed between Kampala and Lusaka is that in the case of Kampala, you've sort of structured market segments and had targeted subsidies or discounts for different market segments. In the case of Lusaka, this was open to everybody, right? Mwansa. Could you sort of explain to us why this in the case of Lusaka and perhaps in the case of Kampala, Alan, have you been able to actually convince, let's say, the higher income segment just by giving them a starter plan, or in some cases they needed a financial incentive? So perhaps Mwansa, you can start by telling us why everybody, if some could pay from their own.
Thanks. Very interesting question, yes. I think like I mentioned in my presentation that this was really not the first time Lusaka Water was intervening in regards to containment on how households should have, what type of facilities, technical options households should have that meet the standards of JMP. So one aspect that we actually had to undertake on the Lusaka sanitation project was to really look post the project. Once the project is not there, what really happens, especially with the fact that the utilities mandate had shifted. So why everyone? So previously we would actually move in a city and through the mechanism set up by our Ministry of Community Development that kind of identifies who's vulnerable in the community, would actually construct those facilities and then expect that we'll have households then come to like pick up. So we do a pilot and then that gets to scale up. That never really happened, I think, in a lot of projects that we undertook. So in trying to actually move in to say, look, this is a discount we are giving to all, we really just wanted to say that who are really the early adopters. And then also, just create that sense of ownership among the households. So yes, that is very true. We've seen households that have actually moved in our offices and paid off the 2,400 once off. But then also what we have seen, and if you saw, I actually showed, we have tried to ensure that we have quite a comprehensive database that actually monitors who's paying what and at what level, because then that gives us the right information on who's really vulnerable. We have cases like just about 87 of households in an area for George compound that they started paying for the facility when we just launched the project. So they've been paying over a period of time and they still haven't reached the maximum, because we thought that was very important for us to actually understand who's vulnerable, because the moment we move in to say you're vulnerable, we are going to construct for these, those that we thought were actually for medium or high income would actually not construct as well. But then with us moving in at a goal to say that we're offering these subsidies to all, it kind of differentiated who the early adopters are, who are actually, who are those that are able to afford, and then those that are really vulnerable, who are taking stock of. If you notice, probably something that I didn't explain is the fact that yes, we have funding under the project, but we are collecting these $15,000 $15,000 from each household, and that is funds that have been ring-fenced. So the mindset of us really constructing for who we call vulnerable is there, and we're really trying to ensure that we pick the right category of households who are vulnerable compared to those that have been able to. I think it will be interesting to learn maybe from Kampala, but I think something which I think is in most African countries is really who is vulnerable in these low-income areas. Because the moment you move in to say we want to construct for vulnerable, everybody becomes vulnerable. And that's something that we're trying to be mindful of. And that's the reason why we moved in with the whole, this is a discount for everyone. We have 5,500 toilets. You construct your toilet, you get your subsidy. If you don't construct under this number, this is the real cost. So that's the approach we wanted to undertake. And just so understand the vulnerability aspects in this low-income areas. Thanks.
Thanks, Mwansa. Alan?
Thank you, Mwansa. I think you asked the big question, yes? Who is vulnerable? And right now in Uganda, we have a very interesting debate about vulnerability over a separate COVID relief program, but that's not the subject for today. Firstly, the idea of a subsidy is to try and address the equity aspect of the program. So try to make sure that those that are unable to access for all those reasons that we saw in the presentation have an opportunity to do so. So that's where the subsidy comes in. And many times the hard part is in trying to target or ensuring that that subsidy actually gets to the person that really needs it. So for Kampala, the team listening can also chip in. They've come up with an interesting way of trying to determine the vulnerability. And that is, once they finished doing the promotion of the whole program, the types of toilets, and the next phase really is for the household to try and identify their preferred toilet that they would wish. So the way it works is that there's a basic toilet. That's the starting point. And then there are all these add-ons that various households would wish to have onto there. But with each add-on is an increased cost as well. So once the overall costs and the add-ons are determined, the households are also required to commit by paying an upfront 20% of that cost that has been agreed between the households and the program. And what the program then does is it bases vulnerability on the interest and the willingness to pay that has been expressed by that household. So for instance, if a household is willing to pay to have add-ons for a really, say, 3-star toilet, the bathroom with tiles and all that, then it's very clear that that one is not going to be vulnerable because the cost is going to be quite high, and so they are easily linked to the banks. But if one comes in and is really looking at the best model and even then say is struggling to pay the upfront commitment fee, and then that one qualifies to be in the medium to low income category. And then the last group is one that is identified not only from their expression of interest, but also using the community structures in place. So the community leaders and our community promoters that reside within those communities. So they will, everyone in the community will know who's vulnerable and who is not. So using that community approach, the last category of the vulnerable group is identified, and that's where they get the 100% or the full subsidy, but of the really basic model of the toilet. I don't know if that answers the question or did.
I think you did. It's an interesting approach, though, to selecting beneficiaries, and I think we need another discussion on this, deeper in Kun. But one thing that participants are asking is on repayment. In the case of Lusaka, I know you only move in once the households have paid their contribution, right? But in the case of Kampala, I understand some of them have to pay back, right? You do actually construct it and then they pay back. Could you tell us a little bit more, Alan, about the process of actually getting households to pay back? How has been the experience so far? I know in your presentation you talked a little bit about it, but what are the key challenges and what are the strategies that you are implementing to make sure that households do pay back?
Thank you again for another, I was going to say tough question, but I'll say good question. As we said in the presentation, it's still early days. And so we're still seeing the repayment rates being quite good at the minute. This is again because of, if you like, a constant interaction with these households. They've got a new facility. We still go back to check on how the facility is performing. So getting feedback in terms of the facility. So I think that is still fostering a very good relationship with these households that then leads to a repayment, a good repayment process. I could also add that the process of identifying these households to benefit also contributes to the likelihood that they'll be able to pay. So going through the hoops of paying the 20% commission fee and meeting a whole host of other criteria helps to really weed out those that would be seen not likely to pay, and those then get cascaded down to the vulnerable group, who will then get facilities arranged for separately. But as I mentioned, it is a risk that we've identified and really wanted to learn from other cities or other programs how they've dealt with this issue of repayments. We're thinking of engaging a third party that can go around, reminding households on their repayments and all, but we're still trying to figure out how we shall really minimize that risk, and would welcome any comments or any advice from other cities. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Alan. Mwanza, it seems that you've explored basically a set of incentives to bring in households that includes financial, legal, and emotional. After implementing, and you have, thousands of toilets already built, at least more than 1,000 built. What do you think has been the incentive that contributed the most to the successes you have observed so far?
Thank you, Odette. I think it's a very good question in Alan's definition. I think I would not really specifically say one intervention actually contributed. I think it's a set of different interventions that actually triggered the demand. What we have seen is we try to track the demand based on an intervention that we've put up. And when we really started, I think we're all for just really dwelling on the messaging that we have, the emotional aspect of it, to say, look, you need to protect your family. You need to provide a good toilet. And then also the aspects of, this is a discount that we are giving you. So the cost of a toilet is like 9,200 kwacha, you're only paying 2,400. But then I think of all these things that we've put up, one other thing maybe that is a little bit estimated and the impact that it has was the fact that I think just being envious, we have noticed in communities that you construct a facility at one household. And then when you're constructing, there are several households around that place that actually now pays for another, wants to have their toilets constructed. So to really answer your question, I think there are a lot of factors that contribute to triggering demand. I think it's a good thing, like I said, you need to test, you need to pilot, and I think you need to be willing to learn and be open about the interventions that you bring in. I don't really think I can say it's a one-size-fits-all. We have tried even the aspect of like really light enforcement, but based on the lessons that we learned about using enforcement in a previous project, we really didn't want to go in full force with starting with enforcement. But just the fact that you send notices to households that are not showing interest to say, look, it's your, this is by law, you're supposed to have a sanitation facility, so this is your notice. That also pushed our demand levels up. And then also, I think I want to focus on the fact that we never really anticipated that by just someone, a community seeing that their neighbor has a facility and then they know about it, and then that triggers. We have seen quite such numbers where you go in a certain community, a certain area in the project community, you realize that they actually ask for the same facility. I think one thing I didn't mention is the fact that we have different, like Alan mentioned, so we allow households, we give the basics facility, a hand washing facility, but those that want something extra can do that. But what we have seen is once you construct a certain technology with attributes, that will be around that neighborhood. So I think there's that aspect of them just being, they don't want to be the only ones left out. They want to be part of what is really happening and exciting in the community. So I think it's really looking at various interventions. So you can market, you can enforce, you can utilize the community, you can utilize the people that are actually at the water kiosk. So we had to brand our water kiosk attendants with the toilets, and then we had to brand our kiosks to say, look, you need to protect your underground water. So several interventions, I think, have actually attributed to us having this demand. And then also just the fact that maybe the coming in of maybe microfinancing institutions that are offering loans. So it's, I think that would be my honest, my honest opinion is a number of interventions have actually led to increase in demand.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mwanza. We almost reaching the end of this webinar, and before we close this discussion, I wanted to hear from you some words of wisdom, Mwanza and Alan. If I hire you as city advisors, and I'm starting an investment program to improve citywide inclusive sanitation, what would you be your advice in terms of, let's say, 2 to 3 drivers of success, and some risks to watch out for? So if you could briefly touch upon that, then I'll pass it on to Kun. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go first. Ladies first. Yeah, I think my advice would be identifying really the roles and responsibilities of all the key stakeholders. So for instance, in our case, I think, and this applies to a lot of areas, other countries, there are various, I think the way we've set up our mandates, I think there's a lot of fragmentation, if you get my point. So you have the local authority sitting with this mandate, you have the local utility. In our case, we also have the regulator, we have the ministries. I think my first advice would be you need to create an enabling environment, because then that helps. In our case, like for Lusaka Water, we are utility, it really helps the utility to actually push the agenda when there's a lot of understanding and there's an enabling environment. You have a regulation in place, you have the local authority, you have the design that fall within the building regulations of the city, you have the ministry that's supporting the mandate of the utility. I think for me, that's the starting advice. And then secondly, once that's actually you come out after that hurdle, like I mentioned in my presentation, the key is really setting up for people to actually receive your products and services. We need to design what people really want, not what we think we should give them. I think we can strike a very good compromise. In our case, we wanted to protect underground water as Lusaka City, but we needed to understand what do people really want, because once you have a product or service that people accept, it becomes easy. I think those are my top 2 steps that I would actually undertake to deliver sanitation products or improve sanitation in a city.
Thanks, Mwanza. Alan, briefly.
Thanks, Odette, and thanks, Mwanza. I think I'll continue from where Mwanza stopped with regard to the enabling environment, to say that the case of Kampala is one that demonstrates a city leadership. So providing really that strategic direction and visions, with very clear visions and very clear goals that all stakeholders, including the households and the communities, can all subscribe to. So I'd say leadership within the enabling environment is very key. And in some contexts, cities are really well placed to provide that leadership. In others, it could be the utilities, as we see in Lusaka and the like. So leadership would be one for me, I'd say. The other is to, again, learning from Kampala. Kampala recognized the challenge that it had. And rather than hiding or burying the head in the sand, they actually went out to try and do something about it. And so that's really bred a culture of being willing to test different approaches and find out what can work, what wouldn't work. And through that, you're actually able to get some solutions that can enable a city to get to scale. So that willingness, that flexibility to try out innovations, to try out different approaches, I would say is one that doesn't come naturally to all of us. So it's something you need to cultivate. And that is something that I would also encourage. And then I think I would finish off with what Mwanza also finished off with, and that is the involvement of the communities, because at the end of the day, they are the key stakeholders that you're trying to uplift. And without a buy-in from them, then all these programs really don't achieve the objectives. So I would say, starting off with those three, then we can start talking about the technological innovations, the financing, and the others. Thank you very much.
Mwanza and Alan, this has been wonderful. Thanks a lot for your great presentations and also your responses to the question. Really great. I know Kun will give more details. There's still questions we didn't answer, some of which are detailed questions, and I'm sure you would be available to assist the participants. And thanks the participants also for listening to us. Kun, over to you.
Thank you so much, Odette, Mwanza, and Alan. This has been great, and it looks like we can do another 5 sessions on the same topic, since there's so much interest and so many good questions and very, very insightful answers as well. So thank you so much, Mwanza and Alan, for taking the lead in our CWIS webinar series and for sharing your insights on the topic, for sharing your learnings from your cities. And thank you so much, Odette, for taking time out of your busy schedule to do such a brilliant moderation of the series. Thank you so much. And so for all of our participants, we are going to be sharing written responses to the questions that have been raised in the Google Doc. So all of the questions, so don't worry, we have copy pasted all of the questions from the chat boxes and from the Q&A to this Google Doc here. We will definitely share all of the written responses to all of the questions here. And we are also going to be sharing the recording as well as the report about this webinar to our website, which is the cywcities.com website. So this website has more information about the programs that are being implemented in each of our CWIS cities in the BMGF CWIS cohort, and all of the webinar materials will be uploaded to the CWIS learning page, which is over here. So with that, I would like to end this. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.